It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most of this beautiful day, beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Good morning and happy Sunday. I am so excited to be here with you. It's funny, but when we started this sermon series and started planning back in July, I had no idea that I would be preaching the last sermon of 2020, but here we are. I'm actually pretty excited because personally, New Year's is one of my favorite days of the years. I love the fact that you get to consider a fresh start and look to the year ahead. I like that most of us slow down and really reflect on where we've been. So I want you to take a breath right now. Take a deep breath. Ready? You can do it with me. And I want you to think about it. It's the last Sunday of 2020. When we started online and we put our church as a community together in this virtual space, it was the second week of Lent, and we had no idea how we were going to handle Easter, let alone make it all the way through Christmas Eve into New Year's. But we did it. Not only did we survive it as a community, we honestly thrived through it. Did you know that each week there's been at least 20 screens of us in our Zoomer church, as I now like to call it? That each week we've had at least 10 people watch sermons on YouTube? Some weeks it's even been in the high 60s. We've had over 192 people watch our Christmas Eve service since Thursday when it was put online. For this year, we've had over 400 people watch a service since we've put them up. Our website has had 612 unique visitors, which is up 2,782% higher than last year. Every single one of those numbers and statistics represents a person who is engaged outside of our Sunday service. In fact, giving has been up this year in our church even, from folks dropping off church checks to the parsonage or sending checks to the church, or even utilizing our online giving that we had set up. Research is showing actually across the country that despite the economic hardships, giving has been fairly consistent. In an article from CNBC, nearly 3 out of 4 millennials, defined here as those ages 25 to 34, have sent some kind of financial aid to family or friends or donated to a nonprofit since the COVID-19 pandemic began. According to payment app Zelle's September Consumer Payment Behaviors Report, which is based on a survey of over 600 interviews a month of adults ages 18 to 72, the highest rate of any of the generations polled, millennials gave the most, followed by Gen Z, ages 18 to 24, with the second highest giving rate of 66%, followed by Gen X, 35 to 54, and baby boomers, 55 to 72, giving less. Overall, 64% of Americans say they've sent financial aid at least once since the start of the pandemic. Zell's report, in fact, finds that there has been over $11.9 billion donated globally to COVID-19 related causes during the first half of 2020. I think that's incredible when you consider the circumstances we've been through this year. So if you've ever talked to me for a while, or specifically if you've read my thesis, all 3 people in my life who have, and maybe my mom, but my dad for sure, and Nick, who helped edit, and Dr. Doug Poe of Wesley Theological Seminary, who was my faculty advisor and actually did reach that 50+ page stack of outlandish ideas of putting a church virtual in specifically Vermont. In fact, the title was From Cradle to Grave, the Gospel in 140 characters or less. I've always been curious and inspired by intergenerational ministry, and especially how it would work virtually using social media. Well, through this year, I found that I have far more questions than answers. It's been interesting to see this little experiment play out, and it's been incredible to see the way that God's answered some of those questions or thoughts I had back in 2017. I by no means was hoping it would come to this, but I am grateful for some of the work that was done back then that we've been able to put into action this year. This pandemic has genuinely brought out much good, much bad, and some of us may have finally seen what in our life we're just a little indifferent to. We've made it through the holidays that we couldn't imagine surviving without family or friends, without the traditions that we love so much. We've seen parents, teachers, first responders, those in retail, hospitality, healthcare workers, people who truly love working in different careers, really struggle through the past year. But we've all made it so far today through 2020. And as of Friday, it will officially be behind us. While, of course, life will mostly be the same, there's hope. There's a vaccine out there. Many of us have loved ones who are already receiving it. We can see a light, but we are not there yet. I think today, though, it's okay to step back and say, wow, look at among a not so great year for most of the world in one way or another. Look at how far you've come. I know for most of you, 2021 isn't going to solve the pandemic or make life like it was in January of 2020 when we started out. But it does mean at least we don't have to write out 2020 on our checkbooks. 2021 just doesn't really roll off the tongue as easy. When I considered the past sermon series and our focus on Mark 12:31, which as a reminder is love thy neighbor as thyself, there is no greater commandment, I thought of all the ways that I've seen neighbors come together. I saw this holiday season with my families and friends and others that I know or heard stories about that took place this last week, a great show of love and appreciation. A favorite story this week where I was blessed is for coming to church last week, I went to get coffee and have a drive. Because I'm constantly working from home and Nick and I only share one car, which he has to use for his job, I like to have a little commute before I go to church and work every Sunday. It's kind of my time. But as I arrived last week, there was some confusion with the drive-through in Manchester, which is pretty small. I ended up in my car chatting with a woman about how we had just moved here and discussing my car color and discussing her skiing plans for this year. When I got to the drive-through, I was so touched because she bought my coffee for me. It was such a small gesture that honestly set the tone for my entire day. I recently in Arlington was able to work with Nick to go give out gifts to families that had been collected who drove through and we'd hand them the sacks. And I was amazed by how many gifts there were and how the community came together. Even our own church, the donations that still came in this year through the hats and mittens trees we typically have. I had a chance to attend a virtual Christmas party where typically we'd exchange a tacky gift or a bottle of wine or re-gift something from the year before that you didn't want to hang on to. But instead this year, we each went around to everyone and shared a strength that we saw in each of us. So by the end of the conversation, 12 people had encouraged you and had shared what they saw in you. I saw people share information on Front Page Forum and Facebook, giving information on community events, either virtually or socially distanced. Maybe every Christmas is like this. Maybe every year is filled with as much goodness and as much community. But because most of our life is virtual, perhaps we're paying more attention or seeing it more. But it was really encouraging to me. I thought of 2020 and Mr. Rogers and Jesus, and I thought to myself, what would Jesus do? Genuinely, what would Jesus do in a global pandemic in 2020? I'd like to think he'd be doing a lot of this. A lot of one-on-one Zoom calls with his disciples, an occasional webinar where thousands would come and listen to what he has to say. And maybe he'd throw it on YouTube. Imagine the views he might get. Isn't that a little bit what his ministry was leading up to? Wasn't his ministry going from town to town in small groups and teaching to the masses? Isn't that what his ministry looked like before the people who loved him turned on him? Isn't the reason we love our neighbors as ourselves? We offer them grace, peace, generosity, forgiveness, and love all wrapped into one because we've had that extended to us. Christianity, community. What do they have in common? They have in common that they both aren't about us. Your personal relationship with Jesus is incredibly important, but right now that's not what this is about. What the root of Jesus's message that I at least take away is that Jesus came to be a great equalizer. He said to love our neighbors as ourselves. He doesn't say to love the people who make the same money or work the same job or who look just like us on paper. He said to love as we've been loved. He said to take heart because he's already overcome the world. He reminds us that those who can cast the first stones are the ones who better not have any of their own sins. He reminded us that the first shall be last and the last should be first. These all go completely against the norm. This is completely radical when you think about it for just a second. And this was the heart of many of Jesus's messages. It's about how we treat others. Sure, you can give someone a Bible, or you can tell someone that you'll pray for them, which I hope you do. But we live our faith out every day with the people we are around. I know I've spoken about this, but it's just so important. When I first started this series, I asked you to consider inviting a friend or sharing a sermon or reaching out. Did you? Did you follow up with anyone? In the past few months, have you been reaching out to specific people in your life and checking in? Have you reached out to your loved ones and spoken to them about their life? Or did you just call, say hi, how are you, let them speak for a few minutes, and then jump into how you feel and why you wanted them to listen when you called them? As you prepare for 2021, as some of you may sit down and think about your resolutions and goals, I hope you reflect on one question. How many of your resolutions are about yourself? How many of your resolutions are about who will give you time or who will invest in the community you're in? And how many resolutions that you have will come at a cost in time or energy of those around you supporting you? I also want you to remember as you start your list to remember this past year. Remember how far you've come. Remember the lessons that have been learned. And imagine how many, and consider the fact of how many times you've said, I can't imagine. I can't imagine living life the way it is. How are we possibly going to stay quarantined? How are we possibly going to spend the holidays without each other? How are we possibly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? You don't have to imagine what it's like anymore. You've experienced already. You've already been through this. I'm going to end this sermon with a minute to reflect, but before we do, I wanted to end it with my favorite Mr. Rogers clip. I want to end this series with this clip, and we'll come back together and reflect for just a moment. So bear with me as I set up my screen.
You know, everyone has lots of ways of feeling. And all those ways of feeling are fine. It's what we do with our feelings that matter in this life. I trust that you're growing in ways that will help you with whatever feelings you may have when you're a child and when you're a grown-up. I hope you're able to grow to respect whoever you are inside. It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling The feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You always make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. Only one person in this whole world like you. That's you yourself. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
That one gets me every time. Your feelings matter. The good, the bad, the anger, the sadness, regrets, joy, hope, the anticipation for the future, they're all valid. I love the importance that comes across in this of respecting your feelings, but also remembering to not let those feelings control you or to pour into other people. You know, I genuinely, I'm not sure how you feel about today or about this year, but I hope you make the space for your feelings. I hope that today you do celebrate and take a deep breath and be thankful that you are alive. I have had such an honor and a joy exploring lessons from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and reflecting on what loving our neighbor looks like. I hope that as we leave, you remember to love others, to respect others, to take a moment to think of where the other is coming from, to take a moment to reflect on how you feel about this past year and what you feel about going into the next year, not with judgment, but with peace and with allowing yourself the space to really feel. I hope you take the time to consider about how you want to affect those around you. What are the ways that you will be intentional going into this new year's? Just like we've ended every sermon, we're going to take a minute of silence. And I want you to think about one thing alone. What is a way in 2021? What lesson from this year, this past 2020 year, do you want to take into the next year? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start my timer, and I'll see you all in a minute, literally. All right. As always, I appreciate for you giving me the time and this sacred space to meet each week. I wish you all a very happy new year. And as always, I am so very glad that you are my neighbor. Have a great Sunday.